On this episode of the Inside Athletic Training Podcast, we sit down with Derek Lawrance, the assistant athletic trainer for the United States men's national team. Derek just came off one of the wildest rides in sports medicine, serving on the U.S. medical staff during the 2026 FIFA World Cup. We talk about what that experience was really like, his career in professional soccer, and a whole lot more. Enjoy the show. All right, Derek, welcome to the Inside Athletic Training Podcast. Excited to have you on to talk all things about your career, specifically some World Cup stuff, as you've been heavily involved there, as many of our listeners will know after the intro there. To start today, a lot of our listeners are looking to break into athletic training or working in the profession, may not be familiar with your career. Give us some background, where you're from, what drew you to athletic training, and specifically to soccer as well.
Thank you very much for having me. This is always fun, and I've enjoyed doing podcasts quite a bit. And just to open up a little bit about my history, and as people are trying to break in, it's always good to know how people actually get to where they are. And I feel like my career path's kind of led me to this pinnacle of the World Cup, which is kind of nice. But it isn't without hard work and perseverance, and the big thing of networking. Right. So originally, Virginia, home through and through, born and raised in Roanoke, Virginia. I was able to go to and graduate from James Madison University, which is a wonderful, wonderful athletic training school. So I really, really enjoyed that. And, what got me into athletic training was really being a small school or small town, Southwest Virginia. And we were the first high school to actually get an athletic trainer when I was a sophomore or so playing soccer, right? So we're the first high school to get that, and it was just one of those, what is athletic training? So had a wonderful athletic trainer there. She opened up, athletic training classes senior year. So got a little bit of exposure there. And that was a couple years after MLS had actually started. So ironically, I still vividly remember sitting down with my counselor, what do you want to do in 5 to 10, what's your career path? He said, I want to be a professional athletic trainer, professional soccer. So kind of crazy, but it's just a vision that I had. And so everything I did from that point on was to get to where I'm pretty much at right now. So I'm trying to find the best athletic training schools. Ironically, I didn't get into JMU straight out of high school, which is kind of funny. So it kind of showed that you really need to work a little bit in school. So went to a D3 school, got my grades up, got into JMU, and what an experience that was. Met some wonderful, wonderful classmates. I still keep in touch with all of my classmates. We're actually going to have a 20-year reunion in Florida in November, which is kind of nice. So get to see a lot of them. But there, I made a very, very important connection with Dr. Jeff Conan. He was our program director at the time. And fortunately for me, his contacts and network was very broad at that time.
Right.
And, so I just got to know him pretty well. And then I went to Georgia Southern University to go work men's soccer as a grad assistant. And during that time, or going towards the end of my 2 years there, I needed to do an internship to fulfill my requirements for graduation. So reached out to Dr. Conan and asked, is there any connections you have in soccer? Because I really want to do an internship in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, I got a great person, Brian Goodstein, DC United head athletic trainer. I'll put you in touch. Put me in touch, did the interview. Landed a internship 2008 at DC United. And that was my first real experience into the professional soccer world. So again, everything I was doing from that point, learning the networking, business, as we all need to know in athletic training, is just crucial.
Right. Yeah.
And built that bridge, got to DC United and did my internship. And that kind of propelled me to a job at Elon University, where I worked with men's soccer again. And had a wonderful, wonderful time there, 3.5 seasons, or 4 full seasons with them, and had a great coaching staff. Ironically, the 2 of the coaches that I worked with at Elon are now, one's an assistant coach with Nashville, and the other one is the academy director for Nashville. So it's kind of interesting that the 3 of us that were together, the small school in Elon University, are now working, within MLS, because that's where we wanted to go. So it was nice support each other.
Yeah.
And so towards the end of the time with Elon, it was just one of those, I wanted more. We get into these kind of, I wouldn't say it's not an easy job. It's just one of those, like, I was settling. I didn't like the feeling. So I really needed to challenge myself more. So there was an opening that came up within MLS with Chivas USA. And again, leaning on your network, I kept in contact with Brian Goodstein from DC United for those 3 years after my internship, and just kind of just sat patiently, but did my job at Elon, and a position came up at Chivas. He was able to help recommend me there. So I shot out to the West Coast to do an interview right before Thanksgiving. And right after Thanksgiving, I was told I was offered the job, and packed my bags and sold my car, flew out to California and started a new life. So that's kind of like what's propelled me here. I guess the shorter piece of that is, I spent 1 year at Chivas, then went to San Jose Earthquakes and spent 9 years there.
Yeah.
Building the ladder to get to the director role there after starting as an assistant. But then again, leaning on the network piece and a little bit of luck by all means, but
sure.
Luck is where opportunity and experience meet, right? So
right.
My head athletic trainer at San Jose ended up becoming the head athletic trainer for the U.S. men's national team. So you can kind of see where.
Gotcha.
But I also had to do a good job with him at San Jose.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so at the time, at the end of 2021, I was ready to leave professional soccer, start a new life. I had finished 10 years in Major League Soccer. My wife and I just welcomed our first child in October of 2021. And at the beginning of 21, we had already decided, like, we're done. We're going to move. We're out of the Bay Area. And just so happened that I was able to work at U.S. national team camp at the end of 21. At that time, they had a full-time assistant, but he was leaving to go to another MLS team to take the head job. And so it was kind of a natural natural move for me, because it was just one of those. I was available. It was a World Cup year. They needed someone full-time going into the World Cup year, and just happened to work out really well that for me.
Yeah.
Of course, I had to continue doing a good job. And that's kind of how I got to be at the U.S. soccer team.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's quite the journey. Just like anyone in professional baseball who we bet on or other sports, it's a journey. And you talk about the networking. We actually had Dr. Conan on the show, I think last May, to talk about cannabis and sports and his time at FIU. Awesome guy. Seemingly knew everybody that I brought up, whether it's Corey Trumbull with Marlins, who was in the FIU program. Maybe you crossed paths there, or
right after I did.
Right. And a couple other PBATS members who have done that program with Dr. Conan. So very small world, whether it's soccer or baseball, it's all connected in athletic training. And you make a great point there about that network and not just like, hey, can I get a job? But you have to do a good job. I think that's what you mentioned a number of times is your skills being on display and doing a good job to be able to earn that next role. Well, Derek, I want to talk a bit about that time with DC United, because in baseball and the guys we bet on, they talk about showing up at minor league camp or spring training that first time, and they're like either blown away by how awesome it is, and it reassures them that this is exactly what they want to do. Like you mentioned, you had this dream since you were younger, or they're like, well, this isn't really what I thought it would be. It's too much work. There's no work-life balance. There are some downsides, of course, to any position.
For sure.
When you got to DC, did you feel ready? And did it reassure, clearly you're still doing it, did it reassure you that this is exactly the path you wanted to be on?
Yeah, it was one of those, I'd spent the last 2 years being a grad student and trying to take the reins by myself and work with the college team by myself and learning that piece. But, to go to another level, it takes an entire team to do that, right? Like, as much as you'd like to believe that you have the ability to do everything yourself, you don't. Because you don't, there's not enough time in the day for you to take care of all your athletes. So when I went to DC United, it was one of those that I was there, blank canvas, open-minded. And, maybe fortunate too was, where they worked, the RFK Stadium, it wasn't as glamorous, place. We worked in the basement of RFK.
That's not the most modern place.
The famous raccoon has its own Twitter account, just all these things. But it was one of those, walking in there and just seeing the diversity of ethnicities and players being in that locker room, and just everything's so soccer centric at that. That wasn't something that I was a part of, because being at Georgia Southern, soccer wasn't a very big deal there. And so just being now entrenched in Major League Soccer was amazing. And, I'm just one to, as many athletic trainers are, you're going to grind, right? And that's what I was willing to do. And, after the first week or two of just getting to know some of the guys, getting to know Goody, Brian Goodstein, Pete Calabrese, who was the assistant athletic trainer, and just really forming a bond with them, like, okay, I can work with these guys, and hopefully they feel the same way, which I know they did. Yeah. But it was now, how can I assert myself? How can I learn and take as much in as possible and do a good enough job to where I know, because, within a week or two, it's like, this is exactly where I want to be. Because the lifestyle, I guess you could say, the schedule for professional soccer is probably the best professional sports schedule that you could ever.
Yeah.
On a daily basis. Now, the length of the season is unreal because you're looking at 10 and a half, 11 months, whereas baseball, it's not, it can be long, but it's very condensed and it's just a lot of work in that window, right?
Right.
But for us, it's just a long season. But, when you have a short practice each day, you're looking at 60 to 90 minutes on a regular basis. I mean, the lifestyle for the player is come in 9:00, 9:30, you're at practice at 10, you're having lunch by 12, and you're out there, right? So for the support staff, you're in there just a little bit before. And then for me, it was like we're done at 2:30, 3:00 at the latest most days. So I really enjoyed that part of it. So yes, it was a mini day, 6, 7 days a week for a long period of time. But I mean, the lifestyle that it gave you, to enjoy your day where you're not locked in a dungeon for 12 to 14 hours, which is ironic because now that, when I work with the national team, it feels like that. But there's some trade-offs for sure.
No doubt. No, that's great to hear. When you got there, it kind of reassured that you were right. And I think you're one of the unique ones that you knew from a very early time that I want to be an athletic trainer within soccer. I think so many people go through different sports, different paths, whether it's clinic experience or something, to learn that they do miss really being part of that team. I think that's such a huge aspect of athletic trainers like yourself it's a selfless position. You serve others. And I think that's the overarching theme, is that you have to be in that mindset to be successful. And want to talk a bit about your time in San Jose. You spent, I think you mentioned, almost a decade there, if not more. You had a bunch of different positions, starting as an assistant athletic trainer, ending up as a director in a position of director of health and performance. What was that like, taking on more responsibility? Were you anxious to move up the ladder? Did you feel like you were moving at the career progression that you thought you should be? How did you kind of manage being with one club for so long? And I know not getting antsy to get to another position at another club, or talk about that loyalty you had with San Jose.
Yeah, part of it is the loyalty that the organization had to us, to be honest with you. I've always said that San Jose Earthquake organization was wonderful. It was a good family. Everyone was in the same building. So you got to know, I could, early days of San Jose, I could go upstairs and just walk into the president's office and just have a conversation.
Yeah.
How many players or how many support staff can say that as part of a professional organization? Like, I can just go upstairs and chat with the president about whatever. It doesn't have to be anything about earthquakes, and open door policy was very true there. So the organization was amazing. People there, and there's still people there, that I started with in 2012, and they're still part of it, like, because it's just that type of organization. Now, as far as success, it wasn't as successful as I probably wanted in my professional career. But again, they were loyal to me, so I felt it was respectful to give it back. But my progression, I felt, was kind of on point for most people. I spent quite a few years as an assistant, just really learning that whole process. And, what kind of started to change my mind a little bit is, I think I could do more, is when we brought in Ron Chenault as the head athletic trainer. I'd only done 3 years or so of MLS at that time, but he hadn't done any. Now, granted, he had some good experience elsewhere, but he hadn't been in MLS. So the first time we ever met was literally the morning of physicals, right? So I had set everything up, got everything prepared. We met at a Starbucks right down the street, and we just went over what's about to happen. And at that point, I just felt like, okay, I'm teaching my boss how to start to operate his job. So I can do that part of it, right? But what I learned a lot from him was there was a lot of administrative aspects that I had no clue about. So and kudos to him, he was very open to teaching me a lot of that stuff. So the next 3 years or so, he brought me along, teaching me a lot of that. And then he became the director, and that's how I became the head. And, again, just learning from him on a daily basis and on a yearly basis on how to do all these things. And then, for me too, was also growing as an athletic trainer, getting into the data side of things, understanding strength conditioning a bit more, because of how important everything kind of meshes together, because you have to operate as a big unit within the performance area. So getting to the director position, it was, I felt good at that point because I understood everything. And then, the organization allowed me to do that. Felt that was where I needed to be. And also you start to learn as an athletic trainer, there's a path that you get to. You want to make more money and you want to work with athletes. on a regular basis. But unfortunately, there's a fork in the road that you have to choose, because sometimes you have to go the administrative route to earn more money, to become a director and do all these things. Or you just try to go this other route and you're just going to be trying to get more money. And sometimes they're not going to value that, which is unfortunate, because in my opinion, I think valuable athletic trainers with their skill sets who just want to work with the athletes, they can almost be just as valuable, if not more, than the administrators, because they're the ones who are actually affecting the athletes' lives.
Yeah.
But at that time, I had done all that stuff, and so I was ready to kind of like move that out to oversee everybody, and kind of learn a little bit more that way. Because again, the common theme in my talk, where just I wanted to challenge myself. Didn't want to get stagnant. Like, how much more can I push, and where's that level to where I feel like, okay, I can handle this, or I can't handle this, and that's where I know, like, I can't do that, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Because we're not superhuman, and there's going to find levels that you just can't.
Yeah.
Do it. And that's okay. And you need to be able to recognize it, or else you're going to, one, be really difficult to work with, or two, you may not be a very good leader. You need to be able to recognize that.
Right. Now, it's interesting to hear you say that, because when we have like, a medical director from the Red Sox, Brad Pearson, on the show, he talks about, he goes to spring training, his hands are just killing him. They're so sore because he misses being able to work with the athletes, because he's upstairs doing administrative work and planning and, big picture stuff. But again, everyone at their core grew up with their hands on athletes in that room. So it's a common theme that we've heard from a lot of people. But to your point, to excel and to work your way toward that front office position, there's going to be less time that you're working with athletes. So it's kind of a catch-22, like you mentioned. Well, Derek, kind of moving on to, I think, what so many of our listeners are eager to hear you talk about. We just got finished wrapping up with the World Cup 2026 here in North America. We'll get into your experience there and all that good stuff. But I'm curious, as a practitioner and working with athletes, when you get to the United States men's national team and you start working with players who are working with other athletic trainers at different clubs throughout the year, different countries even, how do you coordinate that? I know that's a very broad question, but we talked with some people about the World Baseball Classic. Are you talking to athletic trainers from where they play, where they're playing now? There's so much going on. How does that process work when you first break in with the national team, where you're managing the conversations with the clubs they're playing for and stuff like that, based on like their medical history and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple ways you could probably go about it, but the previous regime, when Ron Schnatt was there, they actually took advantage of the COVID time when they didn't have games, and they kind of changed the structure of the U.S. national team medical team to be more proactive. Actually, the entire performance team, so not just the medical side, but the performance team as well. And they took advantage of the time where they set up Zoom calls with the performance and medical staff from each club that they had, because we have a player pool, right?
Yeah.
And that player pool can either be small as maybe 60 or up to 120 or so. Just depends on what coach you have. And so you're trying to balance like how many clubs there are. But they laid the groundwork to start this relationship building, to really get to know the physios, doctors, athletic trainers from all over the world, right? And so when I got into it, fortunately enough for me, with my experience in MLS, it was kind of an easy pass to me. But, I was able to take control of the MLS side. So my job at that point became with the national team to be the liaison with all the athletic trainers of the Major League Soccer. The head athletic trainer, he would keep in contact with all the international clubs, because that would kind of change various ways, but he had already established that. So we kind of went that way. And so it's just been kind of easy for me, keeping the PSAT side of things going, and it just kind of, blends itself. I take my experience with MLS, PSATs, and the U.S. men's national team, and it all kind of just comes together. So we are typically just watching all the players each week. If anything, if there's a red flag of some sort, if they didn't play, if they subbed out early, if they all of a sudden popped up an injury report, we're reaching out to those clubs and getting a good idea so we can report that to our coaches. So it's an ongoing monitoring process that we have to stay on. But, you build the relationship as best you can, because you need that information to be able to help the coaches here, make their decisions on the roster. But you also need those relationships too, because when you bring the players in, if something goes wrong, as it can, if there's an injury, you need to be able to have that good trust that you did everything in good faith for the athlete as best you can under the circumstances that you have. So when you call them and give them some bad news, it's not always the best thing from our side because it's tough because you never want anybody to get injured at any time. You don't want players at the club, but again, it goes back to building those relationships, just getting to know everyone. That helps out.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting to hear. And there's so much that goes into just working for a single MLS team or Major League Baseball team, let alone talking to performance staffs in different countries with 100 players. It's got to be an insane amount of work. So kudos to you for getting that done and put a good product on the field this year. Well, Derek, leading up to the World Cup, there's so much travel, so many moving pieces. When do you guys start preparing as a medical staff for you're qualified, when you're first playing? When do you guys start preparing for travel, for adjusting sleep, for just everything you're doing to get guys ready for where they're going to be day one? What does that process look like for you and the athletic training staff?
Yeah, so the packing situation, I guess it depends on, we can talk about it's a little bit different for a regular camp versus, something of the World Cup, right? A regular camp, 10 days is usually what we're seeing. So we have a full on built pack out that we have that's stationed in the National Training Center area. Mm-hmm. And so it's pretty standardized, obviously. So we know how to replenish that pretty quickly. So that's rather easy. In terms of the players, you'd like to say that you can adjust for the players every single time and get them on reduce their jet lag as best you can before you really push them. But unfortunately, there are times where you can't. You physically cannot. As much as you'd like to ask the players to adjust their time prior to coming, because you see all these things. Oh, if you start changing your bedtime and your wake up process, a couple of days before you travel, because we have a lot of guys who'll come from international over here, right? And that's a big change. But they're still playing at a high level the day before they leave, so they can't adjust prior to coming, right? And so it's just a matter of getting together with our performance team, giving them fly kit if they want that to try to help the transition over. Our nutritionist does an amazing job of getting them all the supplements that they need to try to help break that cycle a little bit and try to be mindful of it as best we can. But there's a lot of constraints around that. There are, for instance, the Nations League tournament last year when we played in Los Angeles, which is the furthest travel that the guys have to make from Europe. So it's a couple more hours time difference. And we had to play on a Thursday. So it was a Thursday, Sunday, and they arrived Sunday, Monday. So if you can imagine, they always say you need at least a day for every hour that you travel. Well, yeah, we don't have that. And we're not. And so, we try to mitigate that a little bit by having an easier practice, what we call a reintegration day for those guys that travel, so travel day plus one. But, put that one day specifically, the guys that arrive on Monday, we're not getting a full training session together until the day before the game. And it just makes it very, very difficult. And there's nothing you can do about it because, again, it's the window, it's the time of the games. And so, it's just the way it goes. Yeah. But, something in the upcoming window, the September, October, we'll probably be bouncing around multiple time zones. But, just like NBA or Major League Baseball, some things you got to kind of do it on the fly. Yeah. So, again, the nutrition, the supplements are probably your best bet.
Yeah. Right. And kind of from your perspective, not so much the players, Derek, the World Cup it's a massive deal. There's so much pressure for you're representing your entire country and you are impacting winning. You're taking care of these players. You have a huge role in terms of an entire country and their backing of this team. Going into that, especially in being the host, what kind of pressure do you feel as an athletic trainer? It's got to be totally different than, or maybe it's not, but I would assume, I don't want to speak for you, but it's got to feel different, walking out there in the United States representing the World Cup team. Talk about your feelings going into it.
Yeah, 2022 in Qatar was a lot different than here in the U.S. for sure. That was the first one for me, and it was just an incredible experience. And you're there in Qatar, you're just kind of isolated in a way. But coming here to U.S., you felt there was a lot more eyes that were going to be on you. And it's not that it's added pressure because now that I'm fortunate to have done one and you do everything building up to that moment. You try to sit there as medical staff, and try to review what are the differences or what are things that we're going to go through for this camp? Because, a normal camp, when I said it, 10, 12 days, it's a lot different than potentially 40, 50 days. Because, and this is a mindset that I had to change too. And this is what I tell people, like, what's the difference between a club and the national team as an athletic trainer? The big one is your mindset has to change from preventing injuries at a club because you have such a long season to how healthy, how well can you keep them feeling as best they can? And what I mean by that is like, I dove into all the data stuff very heavily with earthquakes. Like, how can we use this to, help minimize injury risk? But now it's all about your therapy skills, your manual therapy skills, because I need to be able to make this guy's quad or adductor feel a lot better for the next day, because we don't have time to, we're going to rest for 3 days and then we'll go. Like, we don't. And so that's one mindset shift. But the other part of it too, going into the World Cup, when you talk about pressure, is understanding as a medical staff that your decision making is going to be under a very, very big microscope because of the world platform. And then you start looking at the numbers of viewerships and the hype, I guess, around it. Your decision making, you do it on a regular basis, but you have to really, be very diligent that you're about to do and say all the right things, and informing the communications person exactly what that needs to be said, because anything that's like misconstrued in some way or said incorrectly can be blown up in one way or the other. So I think we did a relatively good job of that.
Right.
It's just a little bit more pressure too when you have the group stage aspect. And if there's an injury, you're trying to think, okay, well, what's the best situation here? Right. And obviously for us, it was nice that we were able to win the first 2 games and the third game be the way it was, so we could rest some bodies. But, you look at different, like in Qatar, our third group stage was a must win, essentially. Right. So you have to really look at risk tolerance a little bit differently as an athletic trainer and a medical staff because of the situation, because it's such a massive, game of some sort. So when you in Qatar, going to the third game, and that was the third game in eight or 10 days, something like that, because we played every 4 days in Qatar, whereas here we played 1 week after, 6 days after. So that was a normal week, which is great. So it gave us a lot of time to really look at it. But, I thought we had a lot more depth this year, which was nice. And so it kind of helped itself a little bit. But the pressure to really hone in your timeline of return to play was massive for this tournament.
Yeah, and you guys, there were some situations like you mentioned, just on the public side, where we're saying, is somebody going to play because we're through already, and how are we managing that versus freshness or rest versus rust, all that kind of, old school thinking about athletes and how that goes. So a lot for you guys to, like you said, even communicate to the comms department to make sure the right word's getting out. And people are always, incredibly interested, or you could also call it nosy about getting information about what's going on. And that's part of the grand stage of what you do, which is awesome and such a big responsibility. Well, Derek, talk about, like, let's go to a game day, when you guys played in Seattle to finish up or whatever. What's a typical day look like for an assistant athletic trainer with the U.S. men's national team getting ready for a World Cup game?
Yeah, I'll give you 2 examples because they're vastly different. So let's just say the one in LA, right, for us. So we stayed in South Orange County, about an hour and 15 minutes away from SoFi. So typically there's a crew, 2 equipment managers and 2 athletic trainers that would travel to the stadium early, typically about 6 hours early. Okay. Really loves his time. The team would go to a different hotel that's closer to the stadium, kind of like a COVID time area where you go to the stadium, take a nap, then go to the game. But for myself as the assistant, I was one of the advanced crews. So we left the same time as the team, but we would go straight to the stadium. So we would sit there, set everything up, prepared. And of course, all the preparation for that really starts the day before, getting our list together, making sure we've got everything together to go to the truck. And, this is like a 6 o'clock kickoff. So you're leaving about 11 o'clock. That's about it. And so you take that time to just sit in the stadium, setting everything up. Obviously, the players show up, get everything ready, go play the game, get done. And then you have about So for the World Cup specifically, on a regular basis, we're leaving the stadium within an hour of the final whistle. It also depends on if we're doing running or a practice after training. And so that can change things. But for this, the friends and family program, that was part of it. So we would leave about 2 hours after the end of the game. And so for the two SoFi games, we're able to just drive right back then to our hotel.
Okay.
South Orange County, which is nice. So similar to Qatar, we didn't really have to leave our hotel. We spent 2 days away from our hotel during the group stage, which was a very big advantage. And that was the Seattle. So for the Seattle game, it's not completely different, but just a much longer day because the game kicked off at 12, right? So as I mentioned, 6 hours before kickoff is when we're usually getting there, right? So we're loading the truck, and we're loading the truck at 4:30 a.m. just getting prepared to go. And this is after working a normal day the day before, where you're working till 10 o'clock because it's match day -1. So like players are really kind of dialed in their health. And so we get to the stadium that early, same process, play the game, amazing victory there. And then it's pack everything up, head to the airport. We took off about 5 o'clock or so, and then it's about a 3-hour flight. We land, we get back to the hotel. We're able to watch the Paraguay, Turkey game as a team, and then we had to see the result. And that was probably about 9 or so. And then it was straight into the training room, started doing post-match therapy sessions. And that took us to about 11 o'clock. And then it was go to bed and wake up the next morning and go to training because we had to do a match day -1 training. They move it back an hour, thankfully, but, we're still up by 8 a.m. after that day.
Yeah.
Keep going. So it's a long day, but it changes, right?
Yeah, that's great insight for, I think, one of the things I've learned in talking with a lot of people looking to break into pro sports athletic training. There's a misconception that you might just be there for the game, that you're taping ankles.
2-hour game is not a 2-hour day.
Right. Doing arm care for a big leaguer pre-bullpen, then getting some ice on them at the end and going home. Far from it. I think that's one of the things we've tried to drive home on this show with all of our 130 plus guests is that it's a lot of work, but it's extremely rewarding. And that's a great example there. You're talking about loading up a truck at 4:30 in the morning for a noon kick, which it's crazy to think about. Well, Derek, the atmospheres looked incredible, specifically in Seattle. Just an awesome stadium there. What's it like walking in there? You were at the 2022 World Cup, but this was, like we talked about, different being at home. How much energy do those fans bring to you as a professional athletic trainer, not just the players as well, you and your staff?
Yeah. When you walk out for warm-ups, it's completely different 2022 to here. And mainly because, I guess it's the most obvious one because it was a pro USA crowd, right? The majority, even when we played Paraguay, and Paraguay usually, the South American clubs, Central American clubs, they'll always have really good fans.
Yeah.
But then, you go out to Seattle against Australia and you walk out and there's a wall of yellow, behind one goal, and then a wall, and then like a little section of yellow in upper tier. But then everything else is just, stars and stripes everywhere. And so then the crowd gets more into it as you go. And it's a very unique feeling by all means, because it's a lot of things that unfortunately we're not used to, right? Because I always reference, our Gold Cup final last year against Mexico in Houston, 70,000 people. And I think probably 60,000 were Mexican fans, which is fine. That's why they do it. Yeah. But to have it flipped was very, very special for everybody. And I think that's what really pushed our players in that very first game. The national anthem, still I could listen to it. I record it on my phone because I'm actually the eyes in the sky, up in the booth. So I get a different perspective and I can listen to it and it'll give me chills within 5 seconds because just that moment of everything, culminating to that piece, right? All the work that you put into it. It's finally, this is the time. This is what it's all about. A few tears here and there during the national anthem, the first one for sure.
Yeah.
But, all that, the fans singing it, everything. It's an incredible experience. And then obviously when you start scoring goals, it's just even more. I'm not a very emotional guy by all means. I don't show much, but when you score a goal and you have the entire stadium just there, it's totally different. Totally different. Because this is the pinnacle of everybody's soccer career. You get
Right.
into it, like in baseball, you're going to go, you want to get to the World Series. You want that feeling, that buzz. You want to see a walk-off, walk-off home run. Like that's the energy that you're going to get. I'd like to say it's probably comparable to that when we score a goal in the World Cup at home. It's probably comparable.
Yeah, I think it's got to be probably even more. I mean, when you think about it, once every 4 years makes it there's so much more pressure because you're not going out the next day. You're not going out the next year or the year after that. It's so much work by you and your staff and the players put into this, short period of time, which just adds on. I'm sure it was absolutely incredible in there. Derek, was there, looking back at the time, from camp to finishing up in Seattle, anything you're most proud of? Obviously not going to give specifics or names or injuries, but anything you're most proud of in terms of you and your staff handling certain situations or just grinding through it and getting to where you were? Anything that stands out from you from the 2026 World Cup?
I think the one big piece for me was, I'll be selfish here in terms of our medical department.
Sure.
And we know what role that we play in this. And we know that we are not wearing a lot of hats, but when I talk about the time of the day, like 12 to 14-hour days is what we're looking at. And, of course, that includes meals and all that. But I mean, you're still, as soon as you wake up and you go down to breakfast, you're on. And you're not off until you walk into your hotel room, at that time. Like a preseason every single day. But, our medical staff did a very good job of the energy, the atmosphere, the environment that we create. Because like for us, we know that our attitudes have to be a certain way, because if we let our attitudes waver a little bit, it could maybe show a little bit to some of the athletes. But we try to make our medical room as welcoming as possible. It also helped having the World Cup games going on in the background. So we'd have a TV and guys they're just kids again, watching the games, just all excited, right? But we try to have music playing all the time. And so it's not necessarily a hangout spot. You always say, like, we don't want it to be a hangout spot, but sometimes you kind of do, because it's just a vibe that you give to everybody. And so I think for us, we provided an amazing atmosphere for the guys to come in, feel comfortable, to get their therapy and, whatever they needed. Obviously, we're there and we always try to do what we could to get whatever that was. But don't get me wrong, we were very fortunate, like where we stayed in our training room, doors opened up and we had ocean breeze and waves. Like it was
not bad. Not bad at all.
It was an atmosphere. Yes. So it helped out tremendously. But I think that would probably be my proudest moment, is just that the environment that we were able to create. And then our staff just being, positive and energetic as best we could. Yes, there are some days that you just hit a wall at 9 o'clock. I can't do this. I got to go to bed. And that's okay. And we were there to pick each other up as we needed. Each morning, it's kind of one of those, as you're about to leave the room, you take a deep breath and just say, all right, this is what I got to do today. Like, I'm really tired from the night before. I just did 4:30 a.m. to 11 p.m. last night. But you know what? These guys who got to go out there and train today, they're not going to be happy. But we got to be positive. We got to go out there and make sure that we're just focused on what's got to get done.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. And we've talked to a lot of people around different sports and how creating an environment in that athletic training room is so key, because you don't want guys to feel like it's doomsday when they're in there. You don't want them to feel like the only time they're in there is when bad news is coming, or team position's coming in to give them bad news, or you're going to give them bad news. So it's cool to hear you share that statement as well, that it's an environment. It's not a hangout where people are just like, not playing ping pong in there, but there is some good time spent in there with just good friends in general. So that's cool to hear you say. We'll talk about what's next for you. World Cup's behind you for 2026. Hopefully many more for you if that's what you want. What's next for the medical staff for the U.S. men's national team? Do you get some time off, spend some time with your family? Are you right back into something? What's kind of the next couple months, next year look like for you guys and the staff?
Yeah, I've been off, I guess you could say, for the last 2 weeks. So, I got home on the 8th and haven't really done much of anything. I've avoided meetings, which is nice, and just kind of spend some time with as we mentioned, no one else heard this, but, I've got 2 kids, a 4 and a 3-year-old. And so being away from them for 43, 44 days was, rather difficult. Now, granted, I did get to see them, since I was very fortunate, like a 0.01% chance that I lived 30 minutes away from where we had base. So I got to see my family a couple of times.
That's awesome.
Nice, without being part of the family and friends. Anyways, so I got to do that, and, you have a mental fog that you have to get over the first couple of days. And that's one of the first piece for me, like in terms of like what what was next. And that was a big thing. I didn't quite expect it, but we got done. And again, this is the crazier thing with these tournaments is you just spent all this time together. We went through these emotional roller coasters, all the games, all the travel, all this like long hours. The game against Belgium, it was terrible. It was bad. We were all down about it. And then within 3.5 hours after the game is over, everyone's saying goodbye. Everyone's saying goodbye. The flights are booked for the next day. It's just like dapping everybody up, saying goodbye. Thanks for everything. Great. Boom, gone. Next morning you wake up, everyone's gone. And you just get home you get home and it's just like, okay, right back to reality. Like we're just on this high for so long. Yeah. And now it's just like, now you're helping pull your kids' pants up when you went to the bathroom or something and, cleaning up after them. So that part of it. And then of course you have to face your neighbors and friends and everyone's asking questions. Like,
right. Like we're doing here today.
Well, why don't we talk about like all the good things we did? Because we did a lot of good things.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Where I guess. Yeah. But that part of the mental piece took about, a week or so. But now I'm all settled back in, starting to get back in the groove of things. We have a September camp coming up. It's actually a long one. There's going to be 4 games in that camp, which is unusual. It's just because they're combining a September and October one.
Yeah.
So from now until then, starting on Monday or so, I'll really start to get in the groove of my conversations with MLS team is really locking down on where MLS players are in their health wise, I think the one big elephant in the room is we don't know who our coach is going to be either. So that's another piece of, for us as medical staff is like, well, we'll continue as is until we know otherwise, because then that could change everything completely as well. But preparing for the September, October camp, then we had Nations League qualification come in November. I think we possibly have another game December, January, because typically we'll have like another one at that point.
Yeah.
And then, honestly, it's just getting in the groove for the next cycle as we talk about in our circle is, for me personally, I want to stay on. I'm going to continue on. It's not that I have a contract that's ended. I just continue on as a full-time employee, which is great until someone else decides otherwise. I have every faith in myself that I can do another cycle. I want to be there in 2030. You're going through the second one, just the taste it left in your mouth, but it's just like, can we do better? And you look at them, it'll be nice to do a real 4-year cycle. Like the Qatar to this one was 3.5 years. Say that, not that it wasn't part of that 4 years, but now if you get a new coach, then you can actually go through all that.
Yeah,
it'll be really fun. But we also have the fortunate side that we just opened up the National Training Center in Fayetteville, Georgia, which we got to train at prior to the World Cup, which is amazing. So now we have we actually have a home that we try to use. And so just see how that can change things for our jobs as we go forward.
Yeah. No, that's great insight there from you in terms of, I think a lot of people out there probably think, all right, we'll reconvene in 4 years, qualify and roll it out there. So it's cool. This whole conversation's been awesome to learn, about how the staff works, what the calendar looks like for an athletic trainer in this position. So I appreciate you sharing that. Well, Derek, to wrap up today, you're a great resource for younger athletic trainers. Like you mentioned, how important networking is and keeping those relationships. For someone early in their career, or perhaps a college student or an intern or something who wants to end up exactly where you are, they want to work in the MLS or for the United States men's national team. They want to be on out there in a World Cup game. What advice do you have? Is that too lofty of a goal? Where do they start? What's your best piece of advice for someone in that position?
I don't think it'll ever be a too lofty of a goal. And, the opportunities are far and few between at this point, or at this level. So I think the biggest thing I always tell people, it takes time. We're in such a instant gratification world right now with cell phones and internet and speed of information comes. But to develop your skill set, experience, your network, it takes time. And, for me, 10 years in Major League Soccer kind of opened the door for me at this point. Again, like I said, I was in a fortunate right position, right place at the right time, but I had to do everything prior to that. So as an up and coming athletic trainer, find out where it is that you want to go. And if you are dead set on professional baseball, professional football, like there's avenues that you can go early on in your career that will set you up for that. And some of it does take sacrifice. Like you have to figure that out because that's that's another thing when you're young in your career. Unfortunately, you're going to have to sacrifice to get to where you really want to be, if that's what you want to do, because it's going to take time, and you may not be able to live in places that you really want to live for a long time. But that's not the goal. You got to look at the end goal. You talk about like, oh, how did I stay in San Jose for so long? Well, fortunately, it was also an area that I really enjoyed living in terms of California.
Yeah.
For leaving North Carolina. And so I was able to stay there more because it gave me leverage, I guess, when I was looking at other jobs, potential jobs, especially when I was an assistant. It's like, oh, I can go be a head athletic trainer somewhere. I want to start looking for these head jobs. But I didn't want to go to middle America. That's just where I didn't want to go.
Right.
And that's okay. But that's also a sacrifice of me not going to get a head job and more money. Right. But I was willing to do that because I wanted to be happy for the most part. And everything that I did was also to make me happy. Now, granted, again, my first job out in California, I had to live in a house with 4 other people in a 3-bedroom house, sharing a bathroom with a couple to pay $650 a month to be part of this house, right? These are the sacrifices I'm talking about early on in your career as you start to really get your financial literacy and everything together. But I did that because I knew where I wanted to be. And so, taking the academy jobs with MLS teams, you may not think that you want to do academy, but I'll tell you what, it's going to be the quickest, easiest way to get your foot in the door for MLS clubs. And you do a really good job there. And they're starting to become a farm system like Major League Baseball. You have your academy, you have your second team, you have your first team. So if you go to work at an academy, you're already in the organization. You're a known commodity, right? It's not like you're working at a high school next door to the training facility. You're like, oh, I want to work for the first team. I've worked at the high school for 8 years. Like, I'm sorry, but that's probably not going to happen, right? In true reality. But if you go and sacrifice 2 years at an academy, you can move up to the second team. Now you get to show your skill set of being an athletic trainer or something for a second team, and then you can move on up in that aspect. So really just understanding the pathway to get to where you want to be is the most important part, and knowing that it's going to take time and you have to make sacrifices early on in your career.
Yeah, that's good advice for all our younger listeners out there. Well, Derek, I know you're super busy. Thanks so much for sharing your time after a really, really busy stretch with the World Cup and so much chaos for you and your family. Glad you're getting to enjoy some time with the kids now. Always appreciate what you do for the profession of athletic training, and we hope to have you on again soon.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sam. Really enjoyed it. And by all means, again, we talked about being open, available, and networking. If you want to, I'll give you my email address or something. People can find me on LinkedIn, obviously. Don't hesitate to reach out if there's any other questions that you feel like I didn't answer or didn't get around. I'm very easy accessible in that aspect and easygoing to where I should respond within at some point.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Derek, and we'll stay in touch.
All right, thanks.